Welcome to Season 2 of How to Not Kill Your Community, a podcast of the Delaware Community Foundation. Join us in exploring how the choices we make impact the well-being of our families and neighbors. This season, we'll bring together experts in volunteering, entrepreneurship, public transportation, and even joy to tackle one essential question: how do we not kill our community? Welcome back again to How to Not Kill Your Community. We are in Season 2, and today we're going to talk about transportation and infrastructure. And we have two fabulous guests to do that with us, Anne Canby and Pam Eaton. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Yes.
And I'm going to start by introducing both of you, and then we'll get to the substance. Anne Canby is a transportation policy expert who served as the first female commissioner of both the New Jersey and the Delaware Departments of Transportation in the 80s and 90s. Congratulations for that. That's a very cool accomplishment. Over your career, Anne, you advocated for multimodal transportation systems, including the introduction of EZPass, expanded regional rail, bike and pedestrian infrastructure, context-sensitive design principles, shifting from highway-centric to broader sustainable options that minimize environmental impacts. Pam Eaton is a seasoned transportation planning executive as well, with more than 35 years of experience advancing sustainable mobility, transit, and infrastructure improvement. Pam has worked in Hawaii, in Rhode Island, testified before Congress after Hurricane Katrina, founded the Rhode Island Flood Mitigation Association chapter, and authored Rhode Island's first public coastal access guide. Welcome to both of you. All right, let's turn to it. Cars, cars, cars. Well, it's nice when we travel to Europe and you can get on a train, you can get all over the place, and there are lots of public transportation options. In the U.S., without a car, you're really in trouble. Aren't we so far away from the public transportation mindset that it makes more sense to lean into different ways of having more cars and electric cars and things like that? Why is a broad commitment to multimodal public transportation so important?
Well, first of all, we can't keep building our way out of it. That's fundamental. And good frequent transit service can provide multiple benefits. Lower costs for people. Transportation is often the second highest household cost for many people, which we don't realize. We just assume we're going to drive, but that hurts a lot of people, especially today with the prices at the gas pump. We get less traffic. It gets to be safer. You help support more compact, walkable, mixed-use neighborhoods and communities, which makes better use of our land. And in Delaware, we all remember Tom Carper saying forever, Delaware is the 49th largest state. Land is a limited asset. We need to be very conscious about how we use it. And so more compact development gets you more on a smaller piece of dirt. It also raises more tax revenue. And there's just multiple benefits: better housing, better health outcomes, all kinds of things redound when you do more compact, walkable neighborhoods.
I'm going to add on to what Anne said and relate to my experience in Maui and Hawaii, and that is everything that Anne said, and particularly in Maui and in much of the Hawaiian Islands, it became a necessity. Because not only was land, just like Delaware, finite, and you were working with a small area, but outrageously expensive. Land was expensive, development was expensive, construction materials were expensive. And in what a lot of people don't realize is most families live with 2 and 3 generations in one home, and they are not big homes. I know from living there for 15 years, working for the county of Maui, it became when I was doing land use planning, we steered people towards, much like Anne is saying, compact, interconnected development, and we did something called transit-oriented development, TOD, which transit means having the land use patterns follow where you wanted jobs, school, and communities. So you had interconnected communities because growth is raging there, development and so forth, but instead of just sprawl, which is very expensive, I mean, not just expensive in terms of homes and the price of the land, but expensive in terms of developing your infrastructure. A lot less expensive going up instead of going way out. And then people are responsible for connecting sewer, water, and so forth. So the push there was with this TOD corridors, developing the corridors so more people, because they were saying transportation costs anywhere 30 to 40% a month of your paycheck. I mean, that's how expensive it is. Wow. Gas, when I left, gas is about $5.50 a gallon. I mean, it's very, very expensive. So we did it in a need of having communities that were close by. So nurses, teachers, doctors, and so forth were near hospitals. They would take bus. Plus, the weather was nice year round. So more people were willing to ride their bikes, or e-bikes have become very big in Hawaii. So it was more out of necessity.
And so, we look here what's happening in Delaware and look at Middletown and how that right now is the growth area. And even when I moved here 10 years ago, it looked completely different than it does today.
Tell me about it.
And Milton and the beach communities. So we're not doing that, right? And the attitude seems to be very different than concentrated growth growing up. It's still sprawl. So what are some things that people have done here to make it a little bit better, even in Delaware?
Well, we tried. We added train station in Churchman's and in Newark, and there's huge opportunities to do, just as Pam said, TOD around those stations, also Claymont. But the land use has to work with. That's a thing in Delaware where we're a little bit disconnected from a lot of other places. The transportation is done by the state, and the land use is done by the local governments, and you got to bring those two things together so that you're working in concert. I mean, we can see what's not working down in Sussex right now. And you get into a cycle if you're just looking at the road side of things where you get congestion because you've allowed development to happen, and people want it wider. So you widen the road, then you open up capacity, then you get more development, then you widen the road. It's a never-ending cycle. And then you get trapped. It's a trap. And it's very, as Pam said, very expensive. The transportation, the water and sewer. Think about the utility poles and lines. Add on top of that the risk we're putting out there for climate and the energy costs we have by doing this. Very inefficient. As Drew Slater, head of Energize Delaware, says, the cheapest form of energy is what we don't use.
Where are you seeing policymakers in Delaware start to say, okay, we take this seriously, we're willing to make some changes in our policies and our zoning and whatnot?
Maybe the pilot project that DSHA Housing Authority has put out. 8 towns and the Sussex have applied and have been accepted to do that. And they had a whole list of, I think, about 8 items in terms of the kinds of development, zoning changes, ADUs, accessible dwelling units, in parking reform, all kinds of things like that. And we'll see. That's just getting underway now, but hopefully that begins to sort of spur people. I was just in Newark this morning at another meeting, and they're interested in doing stuff as well. So I think, and maybe even here in the city, you see what's happened. The riverfront, my favorite investment while I was at Del Dot.
Congratulations.
My river walk I loved it.
It is.
And,
it's still great.
It is great. You can never not find people there.
Yeah.
And anyway, so that's an example of something that's worked, I would say. It's walkable. You can get to your job. You can get to the train station. So that's good.
I want to add a little bit to what Anne's saying, and granted it's Hawaii, but I will say
that's what we want.
Very similar situation. And one of the things that spurred the TOD development was we combined affordable and workforce housing with expedited permitting. As long as these were of a certain concentration, as long as they minimized parking, as long as they made public transit available, as well as bike paths and multi-use paths, and they were within a certain corridor where there's a high concentration of jobs. So we also, we had the stick, but we also had the carrot. And it takes a typical permit for a development in Hawaii is 7 years, 7 to 10. It's like, I'm pretty sure we win. Wow. We win the race on that one.
Wow.
So
Even
the
worse than
incentive, so the
Even worse than
incentive
here,
was,
yeah.
it was unbelievable. But so the incentive was, it's within county code, is within 45 days. And of course, they can have exemptions and so forth, but they had to provide and have the workforce and affordable housing, 52% of it, 52 to 55% of a regular development. And there had to be easy access to public transit and bikes and sidewalks and all that sort of thing.
Which is what Eastern Sussex definitely needs, right?
Yes.
Workforce housing, I mean, particularly there, that's
Big
become a
time.
problem. But so many people are saying, look, I mean, if you think about this being driven by housing, in one sense, people say, but I want my house out on a big piece of property. So it's both, policy, but it's also individual behavior. What convinces people that I got a better idea for you?
Well, think about the changing demographics in Delaware.
Yeah.
Aging population, not enough younger people to fill a lot of jobs. I mean, a year or so ago, spoke to a young guy who was working here in town, had a student loan, had an apartment here, worked in town. He said, this is perfect for me. I don't need or want a lawn.
Right.
So we have a different mix of people. Almost 75% of all the housing in Delaware is single family.
Yeah.
We don't have enough of anything else.
Right.
And so we need much more diverse types of housing, and we need it in places that are accessible, where you can actually walk to some places and not have to have a car be the only way you can get around.
So let's turn to climate change. You spent time in Hawaii. You've experienced with Katrina. We know Delaware is the state that's going to be more flooded per capita than any place in the country. We're so low.
Lowest land.
So that clearly becomes a complication of our current transportation system. How does a multimodal system, some of the things you're talking about, how does that help?
Well, you bring people, first of all, you don't build in areas that are prone to flooding. So you put people in communities where they can get around, and that are not in those areas that are of high risk.
I'm going to add, much of the reason why I was testifying before Congress after Katrina is I was in the world of floodplain and emergency management. Mm-hmm. And I will say, as much as FEMA is being batted around these days, what happened back then was something called mitigation. And basically, once a community was slammed time and time and time again, or catastrophically or whatever, there were certain things that came into play. It wasn't just about throwing public disaster assistance money at a community. Mm-hmm. There were incentives. There were incentives to do what's called hazard mitigation. So, okay, I got slammed, I got flooded, what do I do now? And there was, granted, funds available then to do things such as elevate your property, which I know is not always the smart thing to do, but I'm talking not on stilts, but even above the base floor elevation, or things like move your property or just get rid of your property and sell it, but also doing that with infrastructure. And one of the things that I know really struck me hard with the wildfires in West Maui was going out 2 days later with the Federal Highways Administration and kind of doing a damage assessment. It was pretty horrific when everything is in ashes and it's like, okay, here's an opportunity to do something better. Like, instead of have this traffic signal that's ridiculous because it jams up the dock, it jams up this and that, let's put in a roundabout. Let's put in more walkways. Let's put those sidewalks in we've never been able to put in. And it's amazing to me because with transportation infrastructure, you cannot mitigate. Mm. Right now, the federal laws are such that you have to replace it in kind. So for resilience, whether you're talking a wildfire or more commonly inundation from flooding, even just a sunny day, high tides, those sorts of things with the elevations being so low here in Delaware. Same thing in Rhode Island. We were very flat there also. Right. Was trying to do things such as, stronger, bigger culverts, raising the road, whatever. But there's things you can do to mitigate and minimize the impacts from flooding. Whereas with road infrastructure right now, after a particular catastrophic event, not the case.
I was at an environmental conference last week, and there was a gentleman in the audience who raised the issue of planned migration.
Yeah.
I mean, when there's areas that are at risk, how do you begin setting up the stage for planned migration? That's going to be big downstate. And even in some places, maybe.
Well, we're seeing it in countries around the world, right?
Sure we are.
In a lot of third world countries, particularly. But this country, we've resisted anything like that. Yeah. Even when the Mississippi floods over and over and over again, people say, I still want to build in the same place. Right. So the challenges upstate and downstate are different. Describe what you see as the transportation challenges in Sussex versus the ones we're seeing up here, which are similar but different. Well,
Sussex, for most of the state, we've built it as though the car is the only form of transportation. Right. So that dictates the land use, or the land use dictates the transportation, whichever way you want to look at it. And I think in Sussex, and one of the things that's good about the pilot project is there, I don't know how many, 5 or 6 towns in Sussex that have gone after the pilot or housing. And so they're going to have a chance to look at their ordinances and figure out how they can change things to create more housing, more mixed use, more all the kind of things we're talking about. And that, I think, begins to help focus where development ought to go. And then, maybe that spreads further when people see that it's successful.
And yet the builders are still saying, hey, there's land. A farmer sells land, said, sure, you can do it. It's the highest, best use under the market idea. And it's hard to, nobody's telling them, no, you can't just keep building, right? And
That is true. And now we have to also figure out how to make sure we protect the agricultural industry in the
Exactly.
state, which is a huge piece of our
And
state
if you're a
GDP.
landowner and that's your only asset and the taxes keep going up, it's hard not to sell.
Right. Well, so we got to have ways to help them keep. We are the only in Delaware, the whole Delmarva Peninsula, 5 chicken processors, the only place in the country where that exists. So it's an important industry, and so figuring out how to make sure we protect enough land so we don't have to bring in all the grain, which will then wipe out our competitiveness, I think, gets really important.
So I'm going to ask you this, both of you, this final question. So you both have lots of experience and success in your careers. If you were starting in this work today, what would you want to work on?
I'd say resiliency and climate change, nature-based solutions. Growing up in South Florida, I wanted to be an oceanographer, and I just fell in love with policy and regulations and why things happen, but I would forego that, and I would just start right with resiliency and climate change. I think there's a lot of great science out there. I love science, and I also love working with people. And just creating these partnerships, creating alliances and so forth. But I would go right into resiliency and climate change and the science behind that.
The science behind it, and working with lots of different people at a local level.
Yeah, and
building groups.
yes, I'm glad you asked that, because the key thing is, I started out, my first job was working for Rhode Island Sea Grant. Science is great, but then you've got the policymakers, and one of my jobs was to be the translator in between.
Yeah.
So as great as science is, you've got to make sure that it's understood. And
I assume you also look at that and you say, some people are just going to oppose it. They're going to say, no, that's change. I don't like it. And taking the time to help, to hear people, listen to people, and try to say, well, let me tell you what I think or what I know.
I'm going to just a quick aside.
Please.
You brought that up, and I've been dying to mention this little piece. To that point where science was debated hotly, one of the last plans I worked on in Maui was West Maui, their community plan. And this was 2 years before the fire. And we got to a point, because there were so many diverse opinions, so many people who were climate deniers, people who were very strong environmental advocates. At any rate, I read an article in the New York Times about a small community in western Pennsylvania that was dying. And it was like an old former coal town or something like that, and very hot lines.
Centralia, Pennsylvania. I think that's what it was, yeah.
Then I'm so excited. Okay, so they got together, right? They got together. They decided saving their town was more important than their political differences. So they met Friday mornings at the mayor's or the town administrator's house for coffee and Danish, solely to identify what they could do, what the commonalities were. Stole that idea, took it to Maui, because you've got so many layers there. You've got tourism industry, you have the Hawaiians, it's a cultural melting pot there. You have the environmental advocates, you have the people who don't want to change anything. So we created this group. We were going to call them the Community Champions. And so we brought them in. It's like 15, 20 people, each representing a very diverse opinion or point of view. Brought them in, told them what we wanted. We want this to be community driven, truly. Yeah. And so about an hour into it, a very, very dear friend of mine, who's a very famous Hawaiian family, Ekolu Lindsay, said, Pam, no. Not community champions. No, that sounds too howly, which means white person. He said, no, let's call it the alakai. And alakai, and I want to get this right because I know what it is in my heart, but basically the way it translates out is it means leadership. It means leadership from the perspective of a servant, serving your community. And they guided us through the development of the West Maui plan, and it changed radically. But through that process, because we'd have these meetings with them, then we had the meetings with the Planning Commission, but it would filter out to their cousins, to their family, to their community. And my point is, the result was, it was a plan that was trusted, it was a planning process that was believed in, it was transparent, and they owned it. And so it didn't sit on a shelf. And then sadly, but even despite the fires, they have this plan and this foundation they're building from, with those relationships that have already been melded. So they were able to move
I
forward.
love that. I mean, it's very much
Great
the
story.
deliberative democracy model.
Great
And there's
story.
some very interesting work around
That
the
was
country.
that whole process was, and we've brought it to every other community since then, but I just think that is what's really important.
You get voice and people have agency.
Right.
And then the solution, what you see in these is people don't necessarily like the answer,
Right.
but they trust it
Exactly.
because they were part of
Exactly.
getting to that and they see how they got there.
Ownership is critical. I think of the covered bridge
Yeah.
on Smith over the Brandywine.
Yep.
That was a huge fight. First of all, DelDOT came out with a pretty pedestrian replacement idea. The community went berserk. And I said, wait a minute, let's sit down and talk. And so pulled people together. I stayed out of it because I wanted the people at DelDOT to understand how to work with their constituents. And it went back and forth, and I'd get a call from one, oh, it's not. I said, yeah, well, hold on, back and forth. And then I got a call at the end of 2000 saying, we got an agreement. Because they sat and they worked with each other, and they listened, and they learned, and they built friendships and trust.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about.
So there's a great little bridge there now.
So what would you do if you were restarting your career?
Land use and transportation.
Yeah.
It still goes on. I mean, it is so fundamental. We have to get it right. And we have an opportunity. We just have to, there's been, 16 feet of reports on all this stuff. It's now time to stop writing them, start doing it. Start doing it. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Land use, transportation, the environment, climate change. We've talked about all of it. Thank you, both of you, for joining us here today. Especially as we went on, there were about 100 more things to talk about,
Indeed.
but we have limited time. And thank you both for joining us.
It's fun to do it. Thanks you for having it.
It was a blast. Thanks.
How to Not Kill Your Community is produced by 1440 Film Company and the Delaware Community Foundation, celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. Since our founding in 1986, the DCF has granted more than $530 million to 4,000 organizations by maximizing the giving of thousands of Delawareans. Learn how you can make more possible at www.delcf.org.